We generally have passages from the New Testament, but today we have a very interesting passage from the book of Numbers. I'm looking around for recent confirmands here today, because sometimes we go through the exercise of memorizing the books of the Bible in order. Does anybody here think you can tell us what the first 5 books of the Bible are without cheating? Jackie Saladay's on it. Let's say it together. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. These are very important books. They're the foundation of the Jewish faith, sometimes called the Torah or the law. And if you ever worship in a synagogue, they will be especially wrapped in certain scrolls and put in a certain little ark to be especially venerated and protected, because they are the foundation of their faith. And part of that foundation is to realize that all of us come through the wilderness. And all of us at one point long for the promised land. Some of you know that Ella and I were on vacation recently, and we were in a large city. And you know how you always want to take pictures of some interesting signs that you see in places that you're not familiar with? There was one sign in particular I saw along the highway, and it said, "Beware of aggressive drivers." Now, what do you think when you see something like that? You know, you think, oh boy. We're in the wilderness, right? You have to have laws. You have to have reminders about how bad things can happen to people. The author, James Joyce, once said, "Jesus wept, and no wonder. As long as we're in this world, we will have troubles." And that's what the book of Numbers is about. It originally was named Numbers because there are 2 censuses in it. And this happened about the time of Jesus, actually. Previously, in the Hebrew version, it was called In the Wilderness. In the Wilderness. We kind of need to hear stories about what would happen if our values were completely reordered. Recently, there was a very popular TV series called Lost. And it was about a bunch of people that were on an island and how their attitudes and their actions changed when they were put into a different situation. Some of you may remember the book or the movie Lord of the Flies, about some English school kids who were abandoned on an island. And that's kind of the ancient Lord of the Flies, the book of Numbers, and how they survived and how they had to go back to their original values. And it's in the foundation. It's in the law. It's a spiritual theme recorded in the book of Numbers. Suffering and a way out of suffering is the foundation of our spiritual journey. A recent book has been written about faith. And it says when people begin, they expect to be entering a national park, and they find out that they are in a jungle. They are in the wilderness. All of us like order, and we like orderliness and predictability, and we like safety. How many of you here like things that are orderly? Think about what you do for your daily life. You like to sit in the same seat every time, right? And how does it feel when you walk in and somebody else is sitting in your seat? What's it like when you're cooking in the kitchen and you realize somebody moved your favorite spices? We don't like being in the wilderness, in the jungle. There actually is a hotel chain, and their whole motto is no surprises. Reader's Digest has a story about a motel that bragged about its cleanliness and its orderliness, and they were testing it. They were looking at the carpet, and the wife said, well, I'm going to check under the bed. And she lifted up the frill of the bed and looked under there. And there was a great big sign that said, yes, we sweep under here too. There was no orderliness. There were no niceties in the wilderness. And we have to realize there are still people that live in the wilderness. And in some way or another, every single one of us lives in a wilderness of some sort. Physical or emotional or spiritual, we live in the wilderness. We think about where Moses was. He was in a tent of meeting. That would be difficult, wouldn't it, to move a tent around and have people come out to worship? There was no historic stained glass. There was no air conditioning. There were no donuts. There was no drum team. No guitar, no organ. And Moses was lucky because 68 out of 70 of the people who were on his council showed up for the meeting that day. That's pretty good. They were focused. And why were they focused? They were focused because they were in the wilderness. And they knew that their business was as quickly as possible to move people out of the wilderness. And when, as a church, we become inspired to see those people living in the wilderness and to help them move them out of the wilderness, 68 out of 70 of us are going to make it. So these two guys, we don't know why these guys didn't show up, okay? Eldad and Medad. And they're in the camp when everybody is prophesying and the Spirit alights on them, and they start to prophesy. God's mission is that important, that even if we aren't here, God is still working on us. God is still moving us to do these good things and to think these things that need to happen and we want to be. Joshua, who's an appointed leader, he's the one that Moses chose to take over for him in the end. And he sees something is out of order. These guys are not in their seats. And they're not supposed to be doing this in the camp. And he says something like, I'm telling this young man's a tattletale. You know, there is only one tune, one song that has cross-cultural verification. You think about all the cultures that exist on the face of the planet, there's one song that every culture incorporates, and it means the same thing in every culture. Na, 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 na. Can we all say that together? Na, 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 na. It doesn't feel good to say that. We like to tattle. We count on those people. Somebody's out of order. Some people have a God-given ability to tattle. We even strategize our parenting, knowing the likelihood that our children, in fact, will tattle on one another. It doesn't matter how old you are. And this passage says, God is no respecter of persons. God doesn't obey our rules. And even when we see things one way, God sees things another way. And that God will lift up rulers for us and leaders beyond our doing, beyond our organizing, beyond our ability, beyond our knowing. And so, what does Joshua say to Moses? Lord, stop them. Now, this ought to be pretty familiar to you from our gospel stories. And today, if we read the story from the Gospel of John, it's a story about John finding some men who are healing people. And he doesn't know who these guys are, and he knows that they haven't been following Jesus around. And so he tells them to stop healing people because they're not one of them. And he goes back and he tells Jesus, he's kind of proud of says, I saw these guys and they were healing people and they weren't with us and they didn't have a contract. And I stopped them. So what did Jesus say? He said the same thing that Moses said. Don't stop them. I wish that you were all prophets. I wish that you would all have the Spirit. I wish that you would all prophesy. So what was John missing? What was Joshua missing? What are we missing? We're missing that everybody's life is a wilderness, and we're here simply to walk with them without complaining, without tattling, without losing sight of the real reason that we're here to attend a meeting. And for Moses, he explained that by saying, I wish that you were all prophets. In a world in which we see the delicate balance of our planet being threatened, in a world where we have tens of thousands of gun deaths each year, in a world where we see education declining, in a world where we see meth labs and aimlessness in life in the block in which our church is placed, when we see veterans who are homeless on the streets, when we see world poverty, we know why we come to the tent meeting. And the Spirit of God moves through us and tells us what we need to do in the world. And I want to segue, but it's not a big segue, it's a big segue. First of all, for the last few weeks I've been trying to find a bed for a man who May 1st got an appointment. Sometimes he's a guest at our breakfast program. He's a senior citizen, and he's been sleeping on the floor. And I can't find him a bed. You want to help somebody move out of the wilderness? Let me know if you have a bed for him. Last Sunday, I kind of threw down the gauntlet for the folks of you that were here. We talked about veterans and Memorial Day, and I want to challenge you again. There's something we can do for the veterans in our community in November to help them to know that we appreciate them and that we care about their service and we care about where they are. Let me know what that great thing is that God is calling you to prophesy about, and we'll do something about it. That's why we gather in the tent meeting. And the question is, how will you handle the wilderness? Sometimes we have big signs that say things like, beware of aggressive drivers. Sometimes we take vows in plenty and want, in sickness and health, in joy and sorrow. You might recognize those vows. Those are vows that no matter what wilderness you might encounter, that you face it together without complaining, without falling apart, in your attitudes and in your actions. And the world needs the gospel. The world needs us to get our act together. A new commandment I give you, Jesus said, that you love one another as I love you. This past week I was in a meeting in the Eastern Ohio Association. And we were talking about the church and revitalization. It was a church and ministry meeting. And one of the women, who's an ordained minister, we were in the middle of a conversation. She stopped and she says, well, who wouldn't want to be part of a community where they are loved and prayed for? Who wouldn't want that?